Hey, I'm Srini, host and founder of the Unmistakable Creative Podcast and the creator of Maximize Your Output with Mem. And in this video, I'm going to show you how you can use Mem's Zapier integration to automatically migrate all of your notes from Evernote into Mem. And if you haven't checked it out, be sure to check out our free guide on how to build a second brain. I'll include a link in the description below. Now, let's get to the tutorial. So the main reason that I wanted to do this tutorial about how to migrate notes from Evernote to Mem using Zapier is because I had a prospective client who had a bunch of notes inside of Evernote and was looking for a way to easily transfer them. So first, let me talk about why you would want to use this method instead of just using the Mem import function. One of the issues with Evernote's export is that it exports in a format called Emacs. And so often what ends up happening when you just import a notebook or a bunch of notes from Evernote, the way that you would using the import function is the formatting comes up really mangled inside of Mem because of the fact that it's not in Markdown. And so what ends up happening when you do this is that it actually comes in looking a lot cleaner and it actually automates the process. So basically, even if you have been saving notes to Evernote or you want to continue saving notes to Evernote, you can let Evernote run in the background as a container, but let Mem be the place where you still process and synthesize and use your notes. And a lot of people like saving articles, saving notes from Readwise, and a bunch of other things inside of Evernote. So this is actually a lot less disruptive to your workflow. It basically prevents you from having to completely redesign your workflow, where you can still use Evernote as a container, but not dependent on it nearly as much as you do. So let me talk about the setup first. A couple of different things that I've done here. The first is that I created stacks for the parastructure inside of the second brain. And stacks actually don't come across as notebooks. And then the other thing is that the way Zapier's automation works for this is you can actually import notes or notebooks. And if you import notebooks, it'll bring over the notebook, but it may not bring over all of the content. So I have a couple of different examples here that I put together. So the first is just book notes. You can see here, I have a couple of different book notes here. The second is transcripts. So I want to point out a couple of different things here. One nice thing is that you can actually do all of your tagging in Evernote in advance. You can see here that I actually have tags for podcast transcripts and do the same thing for book note. And that way, those tags will actually carry over into Mem. And since Mem doesn't use folders, tags become a way of organizing all of the information that you import from Evernote into Mem. So you'll see here that we have our different notes. I have a set of podcast transcripts. I have a set of book notes here. You can see here I have a book from Stephen Pressfield, and I've tagged this book notes, another by Gary Klein that I've also tagged as book notes. So once you have tagged all of your notes and grouped them into the notebooks accordingly, you can actually then move over to Zapier. And there's two different ways that you can do this. The first is to actually do what I've done here, where you group different types of notes into different categories like book notes and transcripts. The other, which actually is probably even faster, is to just tag notes and put them into one notebook titled Mem Import. And then anytime that a note is saved to that notebook, it will actually come across into Mem. So let's look at both ways of doing this. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to set up a Zap, which I've already done here. And what this Zap does is it tells Evernote and Mem that anytime there's a new note in one particular notebook, then create a Mem. So what we're going to do is we're going to choose the event, new note, and then you're going to want to go ahead and make sure you connect your Evernote setup. And in this case, the new note that we want to choose is going to come from the notebook transcripts. And then what you're going to do is you're going to test the trigger. You can see here it has a test. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and create a Mem. And this is tied to your Mem account. This part is probably the most important part of this. So you'll see here that I used H1 tag. I like to title all of my notes. It makes them easier to find and easier to use. And you'll see here I put a space between the title, whereas here for the tag, you don't put a space in. So that way the tag comes across. And then what you're going to do is you're going to choose content to text. And you can see here you have a bunch of different options. So what you'll want to do is choose content text, and you'll be able to grab the tags from there. If you want, you can get the URL, but that's probably not really that important because the main thing you're looking for is just the tag, the title, and the content. And then what you're going to do is you're going to press continue. And in this case, it says retest action. If you're doing this for the first time, it'll say test action And that way, what you'll be able to do is figure out if the format came across looking the way that you wanted it to look. And you can see it says a mem was sent to Mem about 1 second ago. Now, if we go over into Mem, you can see here that I have this podcast transcript that came across formatted nice and clean. It didn't bring over the bolds, which might be a little bit of a problem for some of you, but I don't think it's that big a deal. So now we've got this podcast transcripts. Now, let's say that you wanted to change this from importing transcripts into Mem to importing book notes into Mem. So what you're going to do in that case is, rather than having the notebook that you're pulling from be transcripts, you're going to change the notebook so that it says book notes. And the thing you want to make sure is you press refresh field, because otherwise it will pull from the old data, or you could just duplicate this Zap and create one for book notes. And if we go ahead and press continue, we'll see here that sometimes you have to refresh this by pressing load more. And we should see here in just a second, something from the book notes notebook. And there is the book note for Stephen Pressfield's book, Put Your Ass Where Your Heart Wants to Be. And then what we're going to do is repeat the same process again and create a mem. This time you can see here that we wanted the same thing: content text, the tag that you want, and then the title. And I'm going to go ahead and test this really quick. And in just a second, we should see a mem in our inbox for this book note. And if we go to the inbox, we can see right there is our book note for Stephen Pressfield's book, directly imported from Evernote. Okay, so one thing to note here, you'll see here that in this case, it mangled the tags. And so what I recommend in that case, when you're setting up your tag in Mem, is to do something like book dash notes so that it's all one word, because for some reason, when you do 2-word tags, they don't come across properly inside of Mem. And that was a mistake I made here before, and something that I've had happen in the past. So make sure that you use a tag book dash notes for something like this. So always try to use 1-word tags when you're importing using Zapier. Now, let's do one more example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to Evernote, and I'm going to actually move all of these notes into the Mem import notebook. And this actually is probably the fastest way to do this. So rather than having to set up all these different notebooks, I can just tag all of my notes, because they're going to be tagged in Mem anyways, and Mem doesn't use folders. And you can see here we have Mem import. And let's go ahead and fix this book notes note tag right now. We're just going to give it a new tag. We're going to remove that tag, and we're going to add a tag titled book dash notes. We're going to do the same thing for this one. And now we have the podcast transcripts, the book notes, and everything else. I also had something that was an idea for a blog post, so let's just go ahead and move that there as well. So now we have all these notes inside of our Mem import notebook, and they're all tagged as we want them to be. So the way that I would recommend doing this is, if you have a bunch of different notebooks in different categories, is to just make those tags the same thing as the title of the notebook, but just remember to make sure that you only use one word. So for example, if you had a tag like, or a notebook titled book notes, then your tag would be book notes. If you have a notebook titled transcripts, your tag would be transcripts, as you can see here. So now we've got this Mem import notebook inside of Evernote. And what we're going to do is we're going to go back and we're going to create a new Zap right here. And what we're going to do in this Zap is we're going to repeat that same process that we did before. And instead of new note in Evernote, or instead of new note in the transcripts notebook, we're going to change this to the Mem import notebook, because that's where all our notes are. And what we're going to do is we are going to test this trigger again. And you'll see here, it gives us a couple of different options. Let's see if we pull up something else. And we can see here, now it gives us the power of intuition. So what we're going to do is go ahead and test this one more time and make sure that everything comes across the way that we want it to. And we're going to press test action. And in just a second, we should see that note land in our inbox inside of Mem. And there it is. So one thing that you want to be mindful of when you're in Evernote is to test with 1 or 2 notes first and make sure they come across looking like you want them to look. And also, once you make the Zap active, then move the notes over, because what will happen is Zapier is going to look to see if you have a new note. And if you move all your notes over, before testing the Zap, then when you turn the Zap on, Zapier will think there are no new notes here. So what do I mean by that? For example, what we'd say is, okay, we're going to just have, this one book note here first. And once we know that works, then after we turn the Zap on, we would move all of the other notes over, and that would basically run in the background and automatically import all your notes from Evernote directly into Mem using the Zapier integration. And this leads to a much cleaner format. It doesn't mangle the format. The other thing you want to keep in mind is if there's anything inside of your notes in Evernote that might get mangled, for example, you can see here the image didn't come across. That might require a bit of extra coding, or tables or anything like that doesn't currently exist in Mem, that will end up getting mangled. But other than that, if your notes inside of Evernote are primarily text, this is actually probably the fastest way to import your notes from Evernote into Mem using the Zapier integration. And in this case, we've used Evernote, but you could actually use this process to import notes from pretty much all your other tools as well. You could do this with Notion, you could do this with Obsidian, as long as you have a Zapier integration that connects the two tools together. And as always, feel free to leave any questions in the comments below.